All right, so my name is Kobe, and I'm going to be talking to y'all about puns because I didn't want to talk about Dalmatians, and I figured binary 5 is too advanced for an open house crowd. So first, don't worry. So first, a bit about me. So, come on. There we go. I'm a third-year math major, and this is my first Ignite speech. And my favorite superhero is obviously the Punisher. Don't worry, the jokes aren't going to get better from here, so just bear with me. We're going to get to the bears. What are puns? So we all kind of know what puns are, so this is just kind of a formal definition. Also, they're apparently called paranomasia, which is, I wonder why that didn't catch on. And they've basically been around since forever, so since like the ancient Sumerians. And then the next question is obviously why puns, but I decided why was just a better question. It's basically one of the simplest forms of humor that there is, and it's great for any scenario where you're trying to be way too clever for no good reason. So how do we come up with puns, and how do we do that fast? So there's two things I want to talk about, which is homophones and categories. So with categories, it's about thinking about a thing and then thinking about all of the things that are related to that to figure out how you can use those different things to come up with puns. And so, of course, I told you we were going to get to the bears, so here we are. We found the bears. And bear puns are great. Some people don't like them. They find them unbearable or grisly, and they can be a bit polarizing, but personally, I think they're pretty quality. So homophones. Homophones are just words that sound the same. This is pretty basic, but you don't have to have exact homophones. They can be approximate, like dessert and desert aren't technically homophones, but you can swing it if you really try. And so one of the key things with puns is knowing your audience. What do they know? What do they like? What don't they like? So you really want to target your puns towards your audience for maximum effect. So first example is an example of how it might not work if you're with a bunch of vegans and you maybe make some puns about eating meat, like cows. You probably don't want to stake a lot on that. It could be utterly disastrous, and you probably will start a beef with someone. So not a good idea, but on the positive side, if you're with a bunch of space geeks or just people who like space, you can tell some really stellar out-of-this-world jokes, like, what does an astronomer with a broken leg do? Hubble. And then I wanted to throw in a joke for the few parents in the crowd. So this is a story about my friend had a rooster, and I say had a rooster not because anything particularly tragic happened to this rooster, but all of his kids moved out, so he's not really a rooster anymore. He's more of an empty nester. And then a big subset of knowing your audience is pop culture. So, for example, Star Wars is pretty hot right now. I mean, obviously, don't try too hard to come up with a Star Wars pun because it'll just come off pretty forced. But on the flip side of that is something like Lawrence of Arabia, which won the Best Picture in 1963. This is not a good thing to make a joke about because hardly anybody's seen it. It's 3.5 hours long. So most people probably haven't seen this movie for good reason. And another big tip is to just keep it simple. Puns should be fairly obvious and to the point. I mean, the exceptions to this are rubber bands. Jokes are always going to be a stretch, and with comics, the joke is always going to be drawn out. A bad example is I'm as sincere as raw meat. Technically, this is wordplay because sin is Spanish for without, and sear is a type of cooking meat. So technically, there's a joke there, but it's really bad, so don't do this. I'm being as sincere as raw meat. And the last thing I want to talk about is emphasis. So there's two options here, underemphasis, where you just try to slip the puns in there without people noticing, or my favorite, overemphasis, which is where you're just trying to be as corny as possible. And so to give a good example of that, if you're making dinner and you realize that you're out of corn, the correct response wouldn't be, oh no, it's, oh shucks. And so emphasis really helps sell a joke. And then the last two things I wanted to cover were kind of specific cases. So for example, Titanic jokes. 1, don't open with them. They're terrible icebreakers. 2, don't end with them. They need time to sink in. So 3, just try to split it down the middle. And then lastly, we're in the Fisher Science Building, so I had to do fish puns. So there's a 3-step process. 1, you start with a fun fact to hook people in. So electric eels have enough electricity to kill a horse. Then you follow that up with a quick one-liner like, oh, isn't that shocking? And then the 3rd step is just to let that sink in. And now I've got you hook, line, and sinker. Thank you.